A millionaire married a girl in a coma to inherit, then she woke up and stole his heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. It all began on a gray Monday morning, when the city skyline was still half hidden behind mist and the sound of distant traffic echoed like a restless heartbeat. Inside a high-rise office with glass walls and a view that stretched forever, Adrian Cole sat alone at a marble desk worth more than most cars. His tailored suit was perfect, his cufflinks gold, his eyes cold. The only thing imperfect about him was the letter in his hand, the one that said his late father's inheritance would expire in 60 days unless he got married. He read the line again, slowly, like it might change if he stared long enough. Marriage required before 35 to claim full estate. Adrian leaned back, exhaling through his nose, emotionless. Marriage, he muttered. The most expensive word in the English language. His lawyer, a man in his 50s with careful eyes and too many secrets, cleared his throat softly. There's another way, sir. Legal, discreet. A marriage on paper. Adrian arched an eyebrow. Go on. The lawyer opened a thin folder, revealing a photograph of a young woman in a hospital bed. Her skin pale, her lashes dark against her cheeks. Her name's Elena Moore, 27, no family, no power of attorney. She's been in a coma for 8 months after a car accident. We could arrange a legal proxy marriage under medical guardianship. She'll never know. You'll meet the inheritance terms quietly. Adrian stared at the picture longer than he meant to. There was something haunting about the stillness of her face, the small bruise near her temple, the faint ring of sunlight hitting her hospital wristband. She'll never know, he repeated softly. And if she wakes up? Doctors say it's unlikely. The lawyer's tone was clinical, almost rehearsed. Her vitals are stable, but brain activity minimal. She's been declared non-responsive. Adrian looked out the window, where the morning light broke against the towers like shards of glass. Do it, he said finally. Set it up. That night, under the humming fluorescent lights of Westlake Memorial Hospital, Adrian stood by her bed in a tailored black coat. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers. The machines hummed softly, steady, indifferent. He slipped a ring onto her finger, cold against her unmoving hand. The minister whispered the vows. Do you take this woman? I do, Adrian replied, voice low, almost defiant. He didn't believe in vows, but he believed in control. Paperwork signed, inheritance secured, or so he thought. As he turned to leave, his gaze flickered once more to her face. The faint rise and fall of her chest. The way her hair glimmered under the sterile light. Something unexplainable tugged at him, a quiet question he didn't want to answer. You'll never know, he murmured, pocketing the ring box. But as he walked away, the heart monitor beside her bed skipped once, almost like a whisper in the dark. The morning after the marriage, Adrian Cole drove back to his penthouse overlooking the river. The city glowed gold under the sunrise, but he felt nothing. The contract was done, the inheritance secured, and yet a faint unease clung to him like static in the air. He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and stared at the reflection of the skyline in the glass wall. You married a coma patient, he muttered to himself, half in disbelief, half in defiance. For the next several days, he buried himself in work. Meetings, calls, and endless discussions about market shares filled his hours. But the image of the girl in the hospital bed kept breaking through like light under a closed door. He remembered the way the heart monitor blinked once as he left. He told himself it was coincidence, a meaningless glitch. Still, by the end of the week, he found himself driving back to Westlake Memorial Hospital. The elevator ride up to the 7th floor felt longer than usual. The nurse on duty recognized him immediately. Mr. Cole, you are back, she said softly. She is stable, no change. He nodded curtly. I will only stay a few minutes. The room was dimly lit, filled with the soft rhythm of machines. Elena lay still, her skin pale but calm. Her hair brushed neatly over the pillow. Someone had placed a vase of lilies on the side table. The scent was faint, sweet. Adrian stood beside her bed, hands in his pockets, unsure what to say. You do not even know me, he said under his breath. "But you changed everything." He watched the monitor blink in steady green lines. No response, of course. He turned to leave, then stopped when his eyes caught a small item tucked under her hand, a silver locket. He picked it up carefully. Inside was a tiny photograph of a piano, and two children smiling beside it. He closed it slowly, guilt pressing at the back of his chest. "You taught music," he murmured, "and I used you." For the first time in years, the words hurt. From that night on, he began visiting more often. He told himself it was out of obligation, to ensure the hospital's standards were met, but his visits grew longer each time. He brought flowers, changed the water, even adjusted her blanket when the room felt cold. The nurses started whispering that the once cold CEO had softened. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the window, Adrian sat in the chair beside her bed and let his guard down for the first time. "My father used to say love makes you weak," he said quietly. "Maybe he was right. I never let anyone in after he died. I thought money could fill the silence, but it does not." The monitor beeped, slow and steady. He smiled faintly at his own foolishness. "I guess you are the only one who listens." He placed the locket back under her hand and stood to leave. At that exact moment, the heart monitor skipped again just once. He froze, staring at the faint flicker on the screen. "Nurse," he called out, his voice lower, urgent. The nurse hurried in, checking the machine. "It is nothing unusual, Mr. Cole. These fluctuations happen sometimes." But he could not shake the feeling that it was not random. He looked at Elena again, the faintest blush of color rising in her cheeks. Maybe it was the lighting, maybe his mind. "Either way," he whispered, "if you can hear me, I am sorry." Then he left quietly, unaware that behind him, her fingers twitched ever so slightly beneath the blanket, as if answering a promise he did not yet understand. Days turned into weeks, and Adrian's visits to the hospital became a quiet routine. He would arrive late in the evening, after the noise of the world had died down, carrying a cup of coffee he never drank and a book he never opened. The staff no longer questioned his presence. Some of them even smiled when he walked by, whispering about the man who once ruled boardrooms now sitting for hours beside a silent woman. He did not care what they said. Something about the stillness of that room gave him a peace he had never found anywhere else. One afternoon, while checking the machines, Nurse Harris mentioned that music sometimes helped coma patients. Adrian remembered the small locket he had found with the photograph of the piano. That night, he returned with a small speaker and his phone. When he pressed play, the soft notes of Claire de Lune filled the room, slow and delicate. He sat beside her and watched the rise and fall of her chest. "You used to play this, did you not?" he whispered. "Maybe it will remind you that someone still remembers." The melody drifted through the air, brushing against the sterile silence like sunlight through curtains. For the first time, he spoke to her without restraint. He told her about his childhood. How his father had built an empire but forgot to teach him kindness. How he grew up measuring worth in dollars instead of moments. He told her about the loneliness that followed success, the endless applause that never reached his heart. "You do not even know me, but somehow you have done more for me than anyone else ever did," he said softly. "You made me look at myself." The monitor continued its steady rhythm, and for a moment, Adrian almost believed she was listening. Later that night, as he left, he glanced back at her through the half-open door. A nurse was adjusting her blanket, and under the dim light, he thought he saw her fingers move again, faint but real. The next morning, he called Dr. Foster, the attending neurologist, demanding a full check. "She is showing small signs of reflex," the doctor confirmed, looking over the chart. "It is not consciousness yet, but it is encouraging." Adrian nodded, trying to mask the surge of relief in his chest. "Do whatever it takes," he said. Over the following days, he funded a specialized therapy unit in the hospital. The staff began additional treatments, and the room was no longer silent. There was the sound of nurses checking equipment, of soft music playing, of a man finally learning what care meant. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled over the city. Rain streaked down the window as Adrian stood watching the lightning cut across the sky. "You would have liked this view," he murmured. He turned back toward her, and for the first time, he saw it. Her eyelids fluttered. He froze, heart pounding, afraid to believe what he saw. "Elena," he said, stepping closer. The monitor quickened. Her lips parted slightly, a breath escaping. "Doctor," he called out. Within seconds, nurses rushed in, adjusting machines, calling for assistance. Adrian stepped back, his heart racing, as the doctor checked her vitals. "Her brain activity is spiking," Dr. Foster said, almost in disbelief. "She is responding to stimuli." Adrian gripped the side of the bed, his voice shaking for the first time. "She is waking up, is she not?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "It looks that way, Mr. Cole." Adrian stared at her, hardly breathing. The woman he had once married for inheritance, the woman he had used as a means to an end, was fighting her way back to life. The storm outside rumbled louder, and for the first time, Adrian smiled, not the smile of a man who had won something, but of a man who was finally ready to lose everything for someone else. Elena Moore woke up 2 days later to the blinding white of hospital lights and the faint hum of machines. Her body felt heavy, as if time itself had wrapped around her limbs. The air smelled of disinfectant and lilies. She blinked slowly, confusion flooding her face. The first voice she heard was soft but familiar, steady yet trembling. "Easy," Adrian said, leaning forward from the chair beside her bed. "You are safe." Her gaze darted around, trying to make sense of the world. Where am I?" Her voice cracked, dry as paper. "Westlake Memorial Hospital," he answered. "You were in a coma, but you are awake now." She studied him carefully, eyes narrowing. The man before her looked exhausted yet strangely relieved. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his hair disheveled. "Who are you?" she asked weakly. Adrian hesitated. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, but now that it was real, the truth lodged in his throat. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said finally. "I have been taking care of things for you." Her eyes filled with confusion. Taking care of things? Why? Before he could answer, Dr. Foster entered, breaking the tension with calm authority. "Miss Moore, it is good to see you awake," he said, checking her vitals. "Your recovery is remarkable. We will need to monitor you closely, but you are stable." Adrian stepped back, letting the professionals take over, but his eyes never left her. She kept glancing at him between questions, puzzled by his presence. Later that evening, when the room had quieted and the nurses left, Elena looked at him again. "You keep saying my name like you know me," she whispered. "Why?" Adrian swallowed hard. "Because we are connected," she frowned. "Connected how?" He could not bring himself to say it. Not yet. "I will explain soon," he said softly, and left before she could ask more. Over the next few days, Elena grew stronger. She began physical therapy, learning to walk again. Adrian visited daily, bringing flowers, books, and quiet company. Sometimes he read aloud to her. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, the air between them filled with unspoken questions. She noticed how he watched her, not with pity, but with something else, guilt, maybe sorrow. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the blinds, she turned to him. "You look at me like I am part of something you regret," she said. He froze, caught off guard. "It is not regret," he said quietly. "It is gratitude. You made me realize things I should have known long ago." She tilted her head. "But we just met." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were shadowed. "Not exactly." Confusion clouded her expression again, but before she could speak, a nurse entered with her chart, and the conversation ended. That night, Adrian stood alone in the hospital parking lot, the cool air biting at his skin. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. "It is time," he said. "End the agreement. Cancel the trust transfer. I cannot take the money." There was silence on the other end. "Mr. Cole, that is hundreds of millions." "I do not care," Adrian interrupted. "It was built on something wrong. I will find another way." He hung up, feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time, his choices were his own. Upstairs, Elena lay awake, replaying the fragments of her dreams, voices, music, a man whispering apologies she could not understand. When she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of him sitting beside her, reading, talking, waiting. "Who are you really, Adrian Cole?" she whispered into the dark, unaware that the man who had once married her for inheritance now wanted nothing more than to deserve her in truth. The truth came to Elena like a storm she never saw coming. A week after her awakening, she was strong enough to move to a private recovery suite. The nurses wheeled her in, chatting softly, while Adrian followed at a careful distance. He still visited every day, bringing her favorite teas and fresh flowers. She had grown used to his presence, though the mystery of their connection gnawed at her mind. One evening, while he was away on a business call, she overheard two nurses whispering near her door. "Did you know she is his wife? It was in the papers months ago he married her while she was still in a coma." The words struck her like lightning. "That cannot be right," the other nurse said. "Who marries someone in a coma?" "They say it was for inheritance," the first replied, lowering her voice. The Cole family trust required a marriage before 35. Elena felt the air leave her chest. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the blanket. Wife, inheritance, a transaction. Her mind spun with disbelief and anger. That night, when Adrian returned with his usual calm smile, she looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. He froze, the words catching him off guard. "Is what true?" "That you married me while I was in a coma," she said, her voice rising despite the weakness in her body. "For your inheritance." The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the machines. Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came. "Elena," he began, "I can explain." "Explain?" she snapped. "How do you explain marrying someone who could not even say yes?" Tears welled in her eyes, and his own voice broke. "I was a fool. It started as a deal, yes, but it did not stay that way. I did not know you, but when I saw you lying there, I could not walk away. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about money. So now I am supposed to thank you for falling in love with your own lie?" she said bitterly. "You stole my choice." Adrian took a step closer, but she turned her face away. "Leave," she whispered. "Please, just leave." He hesitated, wanting to say more, to beg for a chance, but the look in her eyes made it clear there was nothing left to say. He left quietly, his footsteps fading down the hall. For days, Elena refused to see him. She focused on her therapy, walking longer, breathing deeper, pretending that the man who had betrayed her did not exist. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she remembered his voice reading to her, his hands adjusting her blanket, his confession of loneliness. The anger stayed, but beneath it was something far more dangerous, a trace of longing. Meanwhile, Adrian threw himself into redemption. He resigned from his position at Cole Industries and donated a massive sum to Westlake Memorial, founding a new rehabilitation center in Elena's name. He spent his nights working with architects, planning every detail, determined to build something that would outlive his shame. When the board of trustees asked what he wanted in return, he simply said, "Nothing." Months passed. Elena regained her strength and moved out of the hospital into a small rented apartment overlooking the park. One afternoon, while scrolling through local news on her tablet, she froze. A headline read, "Former CEO funds free recovery program named after coma survivor." The accompanying photo showed Adrian standing before the newly opened facility, speaking to a crowd. Behind him, a plaque read, "The Elena Foundation for Those Who Fight Their Way Back." Her chest tightened as she read his speech, quoted beneath the picture. "We do not get to rewrite the past," he had said, "but we can build something that makes it worth forgiving." Elena set the tablet down and stared out the window. The anger had not disappeared, but it began to soften, replaced by a quiet ache. "You really meant it," she whispered. And for the first time since she had woken, she wondered if the man who had broken her trust could ever truly mend it. 3 months later, the leaves in the park turned gold and red, and the air carried the first chill of autumn. Elena walked slowly along the path, her steps still cautious but strong. The doctors said her recovery bordered on miraculous, and she thanked them politely, but deep down she knew there was one person she had not thanked at all. She had not seen Adrian since the day she confronted him. The Elena Foundation had grown quickly, earning praise from the media and gratitude from patients, but Adrian himself had disappeared from public life. Some said he was traveling, others said he had left the country entirely. Elena tried to convince herself it did not matter, but each time she passed the hospital, her heart ached with unfinished words. One afternoon, while visiting the rehabilitation center that bore her name, she noticed a framed photograph near the entrance. It showed Adrian standing beside a group of patients, smiling genuinely, the sunlight catching his face. Beneath it, a small card read, "Dedicated to those who reminded me what it means to be human." She traced the edge of the frame with her fingers, whispering, "You stubborn man." That night, unable to sleep, She sat at her piano, the one she had finally bought again after months of therapy. Her fingers trembled as they touched the keys, but soon the familiar melody of Claire de Lune filled her apartment, soft and full of memory. Halfway through, emotion overwhelmed her, and she stopped playing. The next morning, she made a decision. She called Dr. Foster and asked if he knew where Adrian was. He hesitated, then said, "He has been volunteering at the center every weekend, early mornings, before anyone arrives." So the next Saturday, Elena went early. The morning light poured through the tall glass windows of the foundation. The air smelled of fresh paint and disinfectant. From the therapy wing, she heard soft music, her music. Following the sound, she stopped in the doorway of a small rehabilitation room. There he was. Adrian Cole, once the untouchable millionaire, now wearing a simple gray sweater, guiding a patient through hand exercises in rhythm to the same song she used to play. He did not notice her at first, too focused on helping the elderly man stretch his fingers. When the session ended and the patient left, Adrian turned and froze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You came," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to see it for myself," Elena replied. "Everything you built. It is yours," he said. "It always was." She shook her head gently. "No, Adrian, it is ours." He looked stunned, unsure how to respond. She stepped closer. "I was angry for a long time. You took something from me that I can never get back, my choice. But you also gave something I did not know I needed a reason to believe again." His eyes glistened. "I never expected forgiveness." "I am not sure it is forgiveness yet," she said softly. "But it is a start." The silence between them was heavy but kind. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, scattering leaves across the courtyard. "Play something," he said suddenly. She smiled faintly. "You still remember?" He gestured to the small upright piano in the corner. She sat, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play the same melody that had once filled the sterile walls of a hospital room. As the notes rose and fell, Adrian stood beside her, eyes closed, breathing in the sound. When the final note faded, he whispered, "You saved me, Elena." She looked up at him, her eyes warm but steady. "No, Adrian, you saved yourself. I just helped you hear it." And for the first time, they both smiled without guilt, knowing that this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something real. Winter came quietly that year, blanketing the city in silver light. The Elena Foundation was thriving, filled with laughter, hope, and the gentle rhythm of recovery. Every Saturday, Elena and Adrian worked side by side at the center, helping patients regain movement, strength, and faith in life again. Their connection had grown softer, deeper, no longer built on guilt but on shared purpose. People whispered about them, about how two souls who began in lies had somehow created something honest. Yet even as warmth returned to their lives, shadows from the past had a way of creeping back. One afternoon, while Elena was organizing files in the foundation's office, a man in a dark coat appeared at the front desk asking for Adrian. His name was Richard Hale, Adrian's former lawyer, the same man who had arranged the Coma marriage months before. His face was stern, his voice sharp. "Mr. Cole," he said, "the board has frozen your assets. They are investigating the annulment of the inheritance transfer. You gave away millions without authorization. The shareholders are furious." Adrian's expression remained calm, though his jaw tightened. "Let them be. I do not need their money," the lawyer scoffed. "You may not care, but they will not stop until they have ruined you. You broke every rule your father built that company on." Adrian's tone stayed steady. "Then maybe it is time those rules were broken." The lawyer left, muttering threats about lawsuits and lost empires, but Adrian did not flinch. When Elena asked what was wrong, he brushed it off at first, not wanting to burden her. But she saw through him. That night, while they cleaned up the therapy room, she said, "You are hiding something again." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "The board wants to destroy me for what I did. I used their wealth to fund the foundation. They say I betrayed the legacy." She stepped closer. "You did not betray it, Adrian. You transformed it." He looked at her with a mix of gratitude and fear. "If they take everything, will you still believe that?" "Yes," she said simply. "Because I did not fall in love with what you had. I fell in love with what you became." He froze, her words sinking into him like warmth after a long frost. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud, love, clear and unguarded. For a long moment, They stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the machines that had once kept her alive. Then, softly, she added, "We are not what happened to us, Adrian. We are what we choose to do next." The next morning, reporters crowded outside the foundation, shouting questions about corporate scandal and misused funds. Cameras flashed, headlines screamed, but inside the glass doors, Adrian stood firm beside Elena as they faced the press together. "I took the money that once represented greed," Adrian told them, his voice unwavering, "and turned it into something that represents life. If that is a crime, then I will answer for it proudly." Elena placed her hand on his arm, steadying him. The crowd went silent. For once, there was no judgment in their eyes, only awe. That night, as snow began to fall outside, Adrian and Elena sat by the window of her apartment, the city glowing beneath them. "You lost everything," she said softly. "Not everything," he replied, looking at her with quiet certainty. "I still have the only thing that ever mattered." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then maybe that is the inheritance you were meant to find." Outside, snowflakes melted against the glass like tiny blessings, and for the first time, Adrian Cole, the man who once married a stranger for money, understood that love, real love, was the only wealth that could not be taken away. Spring returned, and with it came renewal. The snow melted into rivers that glimmered under sunlight, and the city began to bloom again. Months had passed since the press conference, and although Adrian had lost most of his wealth, his name was no longer followed by scandal but by respect. People saw what he had done with the Elena Foundation, how he chose compassion over profit. The story of the millionaire who gave up his fortune to help the woman he once wronged became something of legend. For Elena, life had found a new rhythm. She worked at the foundation full-time now, mentoring patients, teaching music therapy, and smiling more than she ever thought she could. Sometimes she would catch Adrian watching her from across the room, his gaze soft and full of quiet pride. They had not spoken of marriage again, not after everything that had happened. Their connection no longer needed paper or vows. It existed in every small gesture, the way he handed her coffee each morning, the way she touched his sleeve when he looked tired. Yet beneath that peace, a question lingered in Adrian's heart. Could love that began in deception ever truly be reborn in truth? One afternoon, as the foundation hosted its first anniversary gala, that question found its answer. The event was held in the same ballroom where Adrian's father had once thrown corporate banquets. Now the room was transformed. No luxury brands, no board members, just patients, doctors, and volunteers celebrating the lives they had rebuilt. Elena stood near the piano, greeting guests, her laughter echoing like music. Adrian watched her from the back of the hall, a simple black suit replacing the tailored armor he once wore. When she began to play Clair de Lune, the entire room fell silent. Her fingers danced lightly across the keys, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. He remembered the first time he had heard that song, how it had filled a hospital room and woken something inside him. When the final note faded, the audience rose in applause, but Adrian was already moving. He walked to the front, his heart pounding, and when she turned to him in surprise, he took her hand gently. "Elena," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "when I stood beside you months ago in that hospital room, I was a man without a soul. I thought love was something to be traded, something to be earned by power or money. But you," he paused, his voice breaking slightly, "you showed me that love is an act of grace. You woke up, not just from a coma, but from the world I trapped us both in, and you taught me how to live again." The crowd watched silently, many with tears in their eyes. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out the same silver ring he had placed on her finger the night of their sham wedding. "I never deserved this to mean anything," he said, holding it out. "But if you can find it in your heart to start again, not as my obligation but as my choice, will you marry me, truly this time?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she looked at the ring. Then she smiled the same soft, knowing smile that had once only existed in his imagination. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady. "Not because you saved me, Adrian, but because we saved each other." The applause rose again, louder, warmer, wrapping them both in light. As Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger once more, the pianist at the back began to play the same melody she had just finished, and the crowd swayed to its rhythm. For the first time, their story was not about money, or contracts, or inheritance. It was about redemption, about two hearts that had learned to start over in the most unexpected way. And as they stood there, surrounded by the people they had healed, Adrian realized that sometimes the greatest fortune a man can gain is the chance to love honestly. The following summer, the sun rose over the gardens of the Elena Foundation, painting everything in soft gold. The morning breeze carried the scent of jasmine and hope. The world had changed for both of them since that night at the gala. The foundation had expanded to 3 new cities, supported by donors who believed in their story. But today was not about business or reputation or rebuilding. Today was about love. Beneath a white canopy in the courtyard, surrounded by flowers and friends, Adrian and Elena stood side by side once more. This time there were no contracts, no signatures, no motives, other than love itself. The same doctor, who had once declared her condition irreversible, now smiled proudly in the front row. Nurse Harris wiped away tears discreetly. Adrian wore a simple suit. Elena, a flowing white dress that shimmered like sunlight on water. As the officiant began the ceremony, Adrian took her hands gently, his voice steady, yet full of quiet awe. "You were supposed to be my loophole," he said, smiling faintly. "A name on paper, a way to save what I thought mattered. But instead, you became the only thing that mattered at all." Elena's eyes glistened. "You once said love made people weak," she whispered. "Do you still believe that?" He shook his head slowly. "No, love made me real." The crowd smiled, some whispering softly as the ceremony continued. When the moment came, Adrian slipped the same ring onto her finger for the 3rd time, the same one that had once symbolized greed, then regret, and now redemption. "This," he said quietly, "is no longer a reminder of what I did wrong. It is a promise of everything I will do right." The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the applause that followed seemed to echo across the gardens like music. As the guests gathered for the small celebration that followed, children from the rehabilitation program released white doves into the sky. Elena laughed, her face lit with joy as the birds soared upward. Adrian watched her, his heart full. Later, as the sun began to set, they walked together through the garden paths lined with lanterns. The air was warm, the world quiet. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" she asked softly. "About how it all started?" He nodded. "Every day, and I thank fate for being so cruel, because without it, I would never have found you." She smiled. "You did not find me, Adrian. You finally saw me." They stopped beside the fountain, where the reflection of the lanterns rippled across the water. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old hospital bracelet with her name on it, something he had kept all this time. "This was the first time I held your name," he said, placing it in her hand. "Now I hold your heart. I will not lose either again." She looked at him tenderly, then leaned in and kissed him, gentle and sure. In that moment, everything that had once been broken felt whole. As the night deepened, music from the courtyard drifted softly through the air. Someone was playing Clair de Lune. The same song that had witnessed their beginning now carried them into forever. The camera of memory seemed to pull back the foundation, glowing under strings of lights, laughter rising, the newlyweds walking hand in hand under a canopy of stars. A voice echoed softly, warm and certain, like the end of a story told straight to the heart. He married her for inheritance, but what he gained was far greater. He inherited a soul, a purpose, and a love that turned every mistake into grace. Because sometimes, the richest man in the world is the one who learns how to love for real. And with that, the story of Adrian and Elena, once a tale of deception, became a testament to redemption, proof that even the coldest hearts can be reborn when love finally wakes them.